Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Pedig Beis, Halacha Aleph. That's the final share of Halacha Aleph. We are learning today Daf Yud Beis. We left off on Daf Yud Aleph, Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid, the Tani Allah. So, Chavre, we had in the Mishnah the rule of Roiva to Asa. Then the Mishnah went ahead and differentiated between edible seeds, tfu and kitnios, versus zeiroine gina. And as we already started by quoting Braises yesterday on Daf Yud Aleph, that it's not so simple. That even by the tfu and the kitnios, there is a certain point where they will be ruled like zeiroine gina. And the same thing as we will see today, that there is a critical measure when it comes to the zeiroine gina, that if the rate of sowing is very high, and I know that the Rabbi Shimon says, and everything we're learning today is really based on the din of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says beferish in the Mishnah that keshem sho'amru lahachmir by zeiroine gina, and the example that we learned in the Mishnah, not in the Braisa, that we learned the Marafulda, that if you have a zeiroine gina, that all it takes is 1.5 kav to plant a beis sa'ah. There we don't say roiva l'sa. No, we say that a roiva of the 1.5 kav will already be a problem if it's mixed into, let's say, wheat. And then on that, Rab Shimon says, Keshem sho'amru lahachmir kach lohakel. And the example that we were given in the Mishnah, hapishtan. Guys, we learned that a pishtan needs 3 sa'in to a beis sa'ah. By grain, 1 sa'ah of grain is needed to fill up a base of land. Pishtan, their seeds are so large, can you imagine that you need 3 sa'ah of seeds of pishtan for 1 base of? So enachanami. So the Rabbi Shimon says that when it comes to that ratio, that instead of 1 roiva creating the problem of a mixture, you have to have 3 roivas, right? That is what we learned in the Mishnah, but again, we will see today in the Gemara by quoting more Braisas that there are vital qualifications when it comes to the law of garden plants. And ultimately, we're going to come to a different understanding of tfuah kitnias versus the zeiroine gina. This will be extremely important. Based on this new understanding, I know it looks like a little daf, but it's a packed daf. The Gemara will ask whether 2 types of seeds, one governed by the rule, let's get used to these words, of roiva l'sa, and another type of seeds that's governed by the rule of roiva lebeisa. What happens if they are mixed together? Do they combine to create a problem when they get mixed into, the 23 portions out of 24 of a saw? We'll see, we'll appreciate that question in a gavaldic way. And finally, let's just, before we begin learning, I want to say these words, that the average rate, and I'm going to go back to these words, the average rate of sowing of seeds into a beis saw is 1 saw, which is why we call the 50 by 50 amma a beis saw. That's the average. That means that by most grains and legumes, not zeiroine gina, there you have there's no roiv over there. It goes min akotza el akotza, as we'll see. But when it comes generally to planting, to sowing, 1 saw is needed of seeds to fill up a beis saw. And as we will see, even we're going to divide seeds into 2 distinct groups. Let's use these words, guys. Average and below average. Below average will mean, Yakir, stay with me over here. Below average will mean that the seeds are smaller. You need less than a saw to fill up a beis saw. They will be joined together. We're going to join the average and above average. That will be clear. And based on that, we'll have a more detailed understanding of what appeared to be a simple rule in the Mishnah, that we simply would differentiate between edible seeds and non-edible seeds. Like the Mishnah sounded very posh. Edible seeds, tfuah, kitnias, roiva, l'sam, not edible seeds. Zeiroi negina. No, you see how much is needed lebesa, and based on the ratio of 124, that will create a problem. It's going to get a lot more nuanced than that. Okay, that's I think enough of words of introduction. The Gemara again is very small, but we'll do it slowly, and God willing, we'll properly understand. So we left off on Daf Yud Aleph Amid Beis, 3 lines from the bottom and the beginning of the line. The Gemara now, according to the way we are learning the Gemara, is quoting a new Braisa, not regarding Tfuan Kitnius, but regarding Zeiroi Negino. So says the Gemara, the Tani Allah, we learned the Braisa regarding the laws of Zeiroi Negino, that Kigoin Kav v'chatzi kav. That's the beauty again. So when we learned in the Mishnah Zeiroi Negino, the Marav Fulda gave as an example a type of garden plant that you need 1.5 kav to fill up a beisa. Here the Braisa is already giving you seeds that are even more potent, which is that if you have a case of Zeiroi Negino, where all you need is only 1 kav to seed a beisa, or even less. Certain other Zeiroi Neginos, only 0.5 kav of seeds are needed to fill up an entire sa'am. And what did we learn over there yesterday, guys? Yakir, we learned that what's a 24th of 0.5 kav, a half an egg? That was the Gemara was wondering. That's how we began yesterday's share. And the Gemara says yes, that even the quantity of only a half an egg of Zeiroi Negino, if it got mixed, even though inadvertently, with, let's say, wheat, you got a Yemayit or Yavoy, right? The Tanakama versus Rabbi Yossi. Now, but now we're going by implication. It says the Gemara Hakabayim that if you have Zeiroi Negino, we're jumping from 1 kav to 2 kav, that are not that little. You need 2 kav. Now, guys, 2 kav, don't forget, the average is a saw of seeds for a beisa. 1 saw is comprised of 6 kavim. So the Gemara is saying that from this brisa we imply that if you have Zeiroi Negino, it's not that little, but 2 kav, right, is 1/3 of the norm. That if you need to have 2 kav to fill up a beisa, listen, guys, this Zeiroi Negina is not ruled by the law of beisa. That's what the Gabe called output. I'm going to use the words beisa. Now this will be included in the category of Tfuan Kitnius that's ruled by the rule of Roiva Lissa. Beroiva. In other words, we're saying that it's all about size. So when we learned the Mishnah, I was saying edible, not edible, chashuv, not chashuv. It has nothing to do with that. I have to retract that. It has to do with the potency of the seed. The Gemara is implying from this Braisa that these Zeiroi Negina, since they're not that extremely small, they will be included in the general rule of Tfuan Kitnius. 1 roiva, a foreign seed, will disqualify a saw of seed. Wow. Now, if you remember the Braisa we learned above in this Amid, the Gemara points out that there appears to be a contradiction between one Braisa and the other. And there'll be 2 ways of understanding till the end of the Amid. The first way is the Gemara is going to say, yes, we taka have a machlokes between the 2 Braisas. So it's not like a kasha, it's just pointing out. Hacha at Amar. Hacha at Amar means the Braisa that we began today with. We were medayik from the fact that the Braisa says going kav v'katzi chav, that if it's more than a kav and we're jumping to 2 kav, okay. However, but if you remember, Braisa, we're going to call this Braisa number 1 that we learned yesterday. Kabayim echad me'esrim v'arba. In other words, the first Braisa, if you remember, gives 3 kav as the critical measure. 3 kav as the critical measure. From there, we remember, so we imply that anything that's below 3, guys, we're talking about Tfuan Kitnius. The Braisa that we learned yesterday was about Tfuan Kitnius. So we said that even if it's Tfuan Kitnius, even if it's edible seeds, if it's below 3 kav, it's treated like Zeiroi Negino. Right? Gavaldi. And here we're saying The Braisa today that's speaking about Zeroi Negina, that you need 2 kav, that's the critical measure, it becomes like Tfuon Kitnias. And the Chanami says the Gemara, in other words, that there is a machloikas between the 2 Braisas. This approach is based on the premise that we're no longer making a difference inherently whether the seeds are edible or not. The only difference is the average quantity needed to a besa. If it's 2 kitnias, and really we learned today, according to the way we learned, Zeroi Negina, that you need to have 2 kav for a besa. 2 kitnias, you need to have 6 kav. But it's still close enough. On the other hand, even 2 kitnias themselves, according to the first Braisa, if it's below 3, it's like Zeroi Negina. Doesn't go together. In other words, what is the critical amount of seeds needed for a Beisam that will put those seeds either in the category of 2 kitnias or in the category of Zeroi Negina? Machlokes Tanoim, 3 kav, 2 kav. Okay. Or the Gemara is making a whole different point. Guys. Haltka. The Braisa we learned yesterday was about 2 kitnias. The Braisa that we began today's class with is about Zeroi Negina. And the Gemara is making the following point. When it comes to 2 kitnias, there the limit is 3 kav. No, even though normally grains you need to have 6 kav, which is 1 saw to a besa, if the 2 kitnias are of a species, of a type, that they're more potent, there is a critical measure. What's the critical measure? Less than 3 kav. If it's less than 3 kav, then 2 kitnias falls in the category of Zeroi Negina. Today we are learning, it's not a contradiction, that when it comes to Zeroi Negina, that they have this rule, not l'sa, but l'beisa, it's very small. What's the critical point? 2 kav. So you can learn this whole Gemara making this point, not that there is a machlokes tanoim. We have a similarity that 2 kitnias could be ruled like Zeroi Negina. Zeroi Negina could be ruled like 2 kitnias. What does it have to do with the critical measure? The fact that by 2 kitnias the critical measure is 3 kav, anything less than 3 kav it becomes like Zeroi Negina, is not a contradiction to the fact that by Zeroi Negina, if it's big, getting closer to 2 kitnias, what's the critical size? 2 kav. There it's 3, there it's 2. Or it's a machlokes tanoim. Let's go right. Now we're turning to Daf Yud Beis. What we're learning right now is based on the Shita of Rab Shimon. Let me go back to Rab Shimon. When the Mishnah said that Zeroi Negina is not like 2 kitnias, the Mishnah was saying that as a big chumrah, right? Because what did we learn? We learned the Marav Fulda. The example the Marav Fulda gave, I don't want to stick to that because it just makes everything so clear and it doesn't contradict anything that we're learning. That Zeroi Negina, he gave an example that you need to have kav v'chetzi for a besa. 1 of 24, 24th of kav v'chetzi is echad mitazayin bekav. If you know math, you don't need to remember. I don't know math. I remembered what the Marav Fulda said. So that's a big chumrah, that even though you only have echad mitazayin of a kav, a 16th of a kav of Zeroi Negina, if it gets mixed in, let's say with tvua, how much tvua? 23 measures of 24, you got a problem. So the Mishnah presented Zeroi Negina as a chumrah. On that says Rab Shimon, and the fact that there's a whole discussion based on Rab Shimon, everyone agrees with him, or the halach is like it. Said Rab Shimon, I'm just quoting the words of Rab Shimon, that Keshem Shomru Lahachne, Kach Lo Hakim. And Rab Shimon gave an example of Pishtan. By Pishtan, we learned in the Marav Fulda that Pishtan is Zeroi Negina, the opposite. It's not that it's very small. You need the seeds take up so much space that you need to have 3 saw of flax seeds to fill up a besa. And the Chanami says Rab Shimon, and therefore, if you how much of Pishtan seeds will create a maras ayin problem if it got mixed inadvertently with 2 kitnias? 3, not 1 roiva, 3 roivas. Because 3 such, it's proportion. That's what Rab Shimon says. Now, just remember that. Now let's learn Says the Gemara that Rab Ze'era and Rab Avuna in the name of Rab Huna Zot Chad Amar Ad Tisha Kabin, that what? That when you any species that needs 9 kav for Beisam, any species that you need to have 9 kav. We're speaking here of Tvuon Kitnius. Now we're going to Tvuon Kitnius. The average is how much? No, the normal average of Tvuon Kitnius for a base saw is 1 saw. How much is 1 saw? 6 kav. 6 kav. 9 kav means a saw and a half. We're not speaking about Zoray Negina. We're speaking now about Tvuon Kitnius. So they both say that there is a limit. What's the limit? That it's a type of wheat that's weak. In other words, if you put 6 kav in the ground, you're not going to fill up a base saw. What happens if they're bigger? So he says that even if it's up to 9 saw, what would we say by Tvuon Kitnius? Not lebeso. What's the rule of Tvuon Kitnius, David? Roiva l'sa. What happens if this Tvuah needs 9 kav? There are 2 ways of thinking. One way you could think is, well, 9 kav is a portion and a half. Maybe you need to have a revis, a roiva, and a half a roiva. We don't do that. Up until 9 kav, we still stick to the rule of roiva l'sa'a, which means, and by the way, that's a chumrah, or it's even they are moida, just like we just learned right now, that in the small size, there is a merging of Tvuon Kitnius and Zoray Negina by the little. Now we're going in the other direction. Same idea in the other direction. What happens if the Tvuon Kitnius are very big, need to be like Pishtan? Now, up until 9 kav, they're going to still be judged as Tvuon Kitnius, which means more than 9 kav, they're going to become like Zoray Negina. That's going to be the whole daf today. We're going to keep on pointing out from Braisas that we don't stop saying edible, not edible. No, it's about the size. It's about the average. And once either one goes below their average or above their average, they will be judged like the other. Okay. Now, the other one says, we don't know which one, that Atshmaina, same idea. Atshmaina is not, that means that if you have Tvuon Kitnius, and let's say, according to the second opinion of these Tuameroyim, you that type of Kitnius needs a saw and a half, 9 kav. Here, for it to be able to invalidate the mixture, to make a problem in the mixture, won't be any more roiva l'sa. You're going to need to have a roiva and a half l'sa. Okay. Now, again, in other words, he's pointing out that it's all about the output size. So that's Gavaldik. So the top line on Daf Yud Beis is teaching you the same thing we learned on Daf Yud Aleph in the other direction. The more we learn, every step you're going to begin to notice again that the line between Tvuon Kitnius and Zoray Negina gets blurred. It's not about edible or not edible. It's about the potency of the seed. The Marasayan part. No, with seeds that are any seeds, ultimately, if they're very small, 3 kav, 2 kav, any seeds, will be able to invalidate with a lesser amount. Any seeds that are very big, 9, more than 8, even Tvuon Kitnius, since they're very big, which a lot more is needed to fill up the Beisam, only a Roiva L'sa won't be able to invalidate anymore. Like Rab Shimon says, by Pishtan, you need to have 3 Devias. Okay.
Why don't we just say the amount of what you're saying, the output, right? How much it's going to grow? Just say this much of the saw, if it's going to grow that much.
Because we don't always say that. That's the problem. Because we are saying, David, that by Tvuon Kitnius, right now we just learned, let's go according to the first Hamoida, if you have the average Tvuah that's needed for a base saw is 1 saw. He's saying that even if you have a type of wheat that you need to have more than 1 saw the base saw, up until a certain point, we won't care. We will still apply roiva l'sa. But there'll be a certain point where if you need more tfuah l'beisa at some point, then it will become like the Mishnah Zoray Negina. Now, says the Gemara, listen to this. Let's go according to the one that says that 9 kav is the limit. What happens, and let me go another detail of the Mishnah. We also learned in the Mishnah, I know that Rab Shimon says that they have to be from the same min, but we learned that Tanakam and the Chachamim hold that 2 different seeds can combine to create the problem of Roiva L'Sa or Roiva L'Beisa. What happens, based on that and those opinions, what happens if you have one Tisha Va'asara Ma'yushet Starfu? Let's go with the Shita David that any type of grain that 9 kav is needed L'Beisa is still governed by the rule of Roiva L'Sa. The other grain that you need 10 L'Beisa is no longer governed by the rule of Roiva L'Sa. There it's ruled by the L'Beisa. Okay, what happens if you have some of one and some of the other? Can they combine to disqualify a saw of a seed mixture? Now, I want to explain to you what the question is, B'chal. How much got mixed in? From the 9, how much got mixed in? A half of a roiva. From the 10, how much got mixed in? Can't say a half of a roiva. That for sure won't create a problem. From the 10, how much got mixed in? 1/24 of what's needed L'Beisa for it. So you do have a half of again, when we're speaking about a half, we're speaking about 1/24, a roiva. In other words, one has a 1/24 of a saw. The 10 has 1/24 of what it needs L'Beisa. So one second. So, and why would they not combine? Why would they not combine? Maybe by the fact that they're different. In other words, the Rab Shimon holds that Shnei Minim never combine. The Tanakam and the Chachamim hold they do combine. But maybe since they are governed by different rules, they should not combine. Right? The last man I fooled on the Amit. Tisha Vasara Ma'al Sheit Starv. Tesh, by Tesh, we're speaking about the first of these 2 Amiroim. Misha Adinon Beroiva Tesh Misha Beroiva and Basara Benoifel. That's the words Benoifel, not Beisol Benoifel. Ma'al Sheit Starv for Kalecha Lefisha Yuroi. Meaning, like we just explained, Im Nafal Chatzi Roiva, the normal Chatzi Roiva. Min Tes Kabin. The echad min memches min hu asara kabin. He's writing min memches because it's asara. Or 1/24 of noifel. 1/24. How much? Half of that. There you go. 24 and 24 is 48. That's what it means to say.
But you'll never have a full.
In other words, you can argue each one has half of what you need from it to disqualify. But maybe since they have different rules, they should not combine. That was the question. Answers the Gemara. The Gemara has an answer. Daf Yud Beis. Right? Not Toshima, not coming here, but Esachame, come and see. I'll tell you. And the Gemara gives an answer not based on the words of Tanoim, but based on Svarim. That just like Tisha Ushloisha Mitztarfin, what do we mean by Tisha and Shloisha? Let's go to what we just learned today and what we learned today. What we learned today and what we learned today, but that was the last thing we learned yesterday. We learned today that when you have tfuan kitnias, even if, let's go according to the first Hamoida, even if it's not sa'a lebesa, but it's a sa'a and a half lebesa, 9 kav lebesa, it's still governed by the rules of roiva lisa. Let me go in the other direction, what we learned yesterday. That tfuan kitnias, even though we are acknowledging tfuan kitnias, edible, if it's very, very little, at some point, it's going to be ruled like Zeroi Negina. But what was that point? Less than 3 kav. That means if you have tfuan kitnias that are so potent or they're so little that you only need to have a half of a saw, lebeisa, it's still tfuan kitnias. These are the extremities. Now, I know that both of them are ruled by the rule of Roiva L'sa, but still, these seeds are very dissimilar because one of them, you need 9 L'sa. The other one, you need to have 3 L'sa. But you're telling me that they for sure combine because you didn't ask that question, because they are governed by the same rules, but they're very dissimilar. That's his logic, that just like Tisha und Shleisha, for sure, mitztarfin, 9 and 10 are much closer to each other. I know that they are not governed by the same rules, but still, they're very similar to each other. That's it. It's like a Kal V'chomer. And I want to add, L'choira, all based on Marasayin. Because if the issue would not have been Marasayin in other areas of halacha, to my memory, that would not be a good comparison. Because Tisha B'Asara are governed by other halachas. The halacha is that which determines similar or dissimilar. But when it comes to Marasayin, halacha doesn't determine what does it look like. So since you're telling me that 9 and 3 are still going to be mitzdarif because they are governed by the same rules, but they're mitzdarif even though they're so dissimilar, Tisha V'Asara Le'Kol Shchein, because the sowing rate is so much closer. It's almost the same. Even though halachically it's governed by other rules, the Gemara is saying, if it will be the Babli, since the whole thing is Marasayin, they look the same. We're not saying that they should be the same amount of a half of a roiva. We are acknowledging the half of the roiva of 9 is a physical half of a roiva. Half of a roiva. Half of a roiva of a cup. The half of the roiva of the 10 is benoifel, is lebeisa, is output, doesn't matter. But they will combine. Okay.
Where else do we find this idea where we disregard
the halachic difference?
Exactly
because of Marasayin. I think it's because of Marasayin, the way I understand. Okay. Now, this is going to be good.
So his answer is that they do combine, just to
the answer is that they do combine.
Got it.
Okay, now let's move on to something else. And again, I just want to repeat. The average rate of one saw, the average rate is that one saw of Tfuan Kitnius will be needed to sow a base saw. The fact that we have an average, we will...
Any kidneys? It doesn't matter?
Tfuan Kitnius, yeah. The average, and then, as we learned, even if there are seeds that are smaller, up until 3 kavs, even if there are seeds that you need bigger, it's up until 9 kavs. We just said that Tisha and Shloisha mitztarfin, Abir. The Gemara is now going to make a point that we're going to use the average rate as an important halachic indicator to make 2 distinct groups. And that will be that anything that belongs to the average or to the below average will belong to a group, as we'll see in a moment. Anything that's average and above average, we will consider to be in a separate group. For what? Let's read it inside. Says the Gemara, Rab Oven and Rabbi Chanina, Tarvayin Amrin, that saw Chaylekas Beinayim. In other words, even though we are accepting the rules that we learned until now, that as long as it is 3 or more, as long as it is 9 and less, they will be governed by the rule of Roiva L'Sa'ah. However, guys, Lahalkab, what we are going to start to focus now that we never focused until now is into what did it get mixed? Till now, we were only saying you have a roiva that fell into 2 kidneys. You had a besa, neufel besa into 2 kidneys. Okay. Now he's saying the following: that we have to look at one more thing. Into what did it fall into? Let me explain to you what I mean. If you have 2 kidneys, David, it's potent. 3 kav is enough to a besa. if it falls into the majority seed, that is either with this average or even the normal average, and the chanami roiva l'sa. But what's going to happen if you have a seed that's in the category of average or less? That means you need one saw lebesa or less. You have a roiva of it. What happens if it fell into another seed of tfuan kitnius, but that tfuan kitnius is not above 10, not above 9, but it's above the 1 average. It's between 1 and 9, between 6 kav and 9 kav. These two will not combine, meaning the Gemara explains exactly what he's saying, that roiva sa asur b'shloishos kavim. Average and below average and average are in the same category. Listen to these words. Average and above average and average are in the same category. But you cannot go from below average to above average. So therefore, the Gemara gives these examples. If you have a species that you need to have exactly one saw average, lebesa, and you have how much of it? A roiva of it, and it fell into the majority seed. The majority seed is a much larger seed. The majority seed, is a much smaller seed. The majority seed is, I'm calling this below average, because you only need 3 kav into a besa. We're going to say it asered it. We don't care about the besa, just the measurements. Roiva la besa, or roiva shloishas kabin. If you have a roiva kav of a seed that's not average, that's below average. Below average means 3 kav enough for a besa, and it falls into an average majority seed. Average means a tfuah kidneys that we keep on saying. The average is 1 roiva l'sa. We will follow the rule aser b'sa. Same thing in the other direction. That if you have a roiva of an average seed, average means saw, 1 saw to a besa, a roiva of that. If it fell into the majority seed, what's the majority seed? It's still in the category of tfuan kitnius because 9 kavim. It's not more than 9 kav. It's also going to make it prohibited. Or in the other direction, if you have a roiva of a kav, of a seed that's above average, meaning you need to have up until 9 kav to plant a besa. So the minority seed is from the 9 kav. It fell into the average. That is where you will have a problem. What is he implying? He's implying what's going to happen if you have, let's say, the minority seed, David, is of a type that you need 3 kav to a besa. The minority seed. It fell into the majority seed that is above average. Right? You're going from 3 kav into 9 kav, just as an example. It's really under 1 saw into that which you need more than 1 saw. No longer will you say roiva l'sa. You know what you're going to say there? Neufel, output.
What's neufel?
Gavaldik. Okay, so let's read one more time, guys. What we learned until now, again, the Mishnah says edible versus not edible. The Gemara brings one brayso, another brayso, a third brayso, a fourth brayso. What did we get to? It's not about edible or not edible. It's about how much seed do you need to fill a besa. Even tfuan kitnius, what we learned today is if it's less than 3 kav, zero negina. And it's not governed by the rule of roiva l'sa, it will be governed by the rule of neufel lebesa. What Danny called output. I just want to use the words that they're using over here.
Neufel lebesa means output?
Yeah. If you have tfuan kitnius, again, that we learned, that are so big that you need to have, let's go, more than 9 kavs are needed lebesa, it would also be ruled by neufel lebesa. So where do you have the rule of roiva l'sa, which is the first rule of the Mishnah? When you have tfuan kitnius, that's between 3 and 9. So far, we're good. Then we also said that 3 and 9 are mitztarfin. That was the top of Daf Yud Beis. They're mitztarfin if together they make the minority seed that falls into the majority seed. Now the Gemara, the last step is, now let's analyze the minority seed and the majority seed. What happens if they are in different categories? What do I mean by different categories? They're both governed by the rule of Roiva L'Sa. They're both governed by the rule of Tvon Kitnius, but the minority seed, a Roiva of the is a type of seed that only 3 kav is needed, which is a half a solo besa. The majority seed into which it fell into, it got mixed into inadvertently, is also Tvon Kitnius, but that's a type of seed that you need more than 1 saw of seed to fill up a besa. We're calling that 9, the above average. If that is what happened, or in the reverse, the minority seed came from 9 kav, more than 1 saw. The majority seed is from 3 kav, means less than 1 saw. We're not going to use the rule of Reiva L'Sa. We're going to use the rule of what the Mishnah said, Tvon Kitnis. We're going to use the rule of what Danny calls output. We're going to use the rule of Neufal L'Beisa.
So
go ahead.
Could you say that if you take the high potency seeds and the low potency seeds, they don't combine, but if you have the average potency, it combines with low potency or high potency?
Mamish. And when we're speaking about combination, I just want to make it clear. There are 2 types of combinations. Up until this last piece of Gemara, up until the statement, Socher Lekes Beneim, the combination, Danny, that we were speaking about, not Rab Shimon. The combination of the Tanakam and the Chachamim was 2 minority seeds combining to get the critical Roiva, however you cheshbon the Roiva, that could create a problem. That was the combination that we were talking about at Kan. Now we're changing the whole, we're looking at something else. We're looking about the minority seed and the majority seed. When do you use the rule of Roiva L'Sa? Roiva L'Sa, only if the minority seed and the majority seed are either equally average. Average, you can be meshadech with below average. Average, you can be meshadech with above average. It's like my shidduchen. You think you're above average, but your wife is average. Seder. And she thinks the opposite. It works. The problem is if one says, I'm above average, and you, honey, you're below average, doesn't combine. It's a gatenish. That's where the problem comes. Okay, L'chai.
Rabbi, so
yes.
Just to clarify that last point, when you have the high potency and low potency,
yes,
what does it mean? What does it mean that now we look at the output? What is that final piece?
That would mean is that instead of using, even though it's one kitnius, we're not going to use the rule of Roiva L'Sa, we're going to use the rule of Neufal L'Beisa.
Where does it say that?
The Gemara says it right now. The Gemara says it in a Yerushalmi way because the Gemara is implying it. The Gemara didn't say that explicitly.
And what does that mean?
Yes.
So now you look at how much gets planted and what, and when is it invalidated?
We look only at the foreign seed, Danny. We look only at the foreign seed because the majority seed is still in the category of Tuan kidneys. But how much of the foreign seed or the minority seed, however, whatever word you're going to use, how much of it is needed to create a problem? You can't say a roiva hakav. You can't say a 24th of the seed. You have to say then, now you have to cheshbon how much of it is needed lebeisa. That's your starting point. And 1/24th of that is the critical amount needed to create a problem. Clear. Vital. And now let's go back to the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, this is Rab Shimon. Again, the Tanakama, when the Tanakama introduced the din of Zeroy Negino, the Tanakama introduced the Lahachmer, we were saying, because the case of the Tanakama was Zeroy Negino, that you need a kav and a half, which means that a roiva of that is Echad Mitezayin. Comes along Rab Shimon and he says, I agree with you, but don't only give me an example of Hachmer, I'll give you an example of Hakil. And he gave the Mishnah the example of Pishtan, that Pishtan seed. You know how much Pishtan seed you need to plant a base of? 3 saw of seed. So now when you say that the critical problem is a roiva, well, 3 Pishtan betfuam mitztarefes How much is it? Says the Gemara. Shloisha revoyin shal pishton are needed to make a problem b'sa'ah. And if you have less than 3 revoyin, I was saying 3 reviyasin, that's wrong. 3 revoyim, if this Gersa is correct, that is where you have a problem. And if you have less than that amount, you don't have a problem. Now, hey, Avida.
3 revayim, I'm sorry to be annoying. 3 revayim in terms of the size of the saw is how much?
The word roiva means a quarter of a cup, just to know what it means.
Yeah, but it also means 1/24 of the saw.
The question is from what? 3? No, it means that we're using the formula not of the seed, but of the output. Very good. The word output is called noifal lebesa. That's the words of Chazal. Roiva lesa or noifal lebesa. Okay, Chavida, the Gemara spells it out that asar de zora roiva de chitim. That in the space in which one would put into the ground a roiva of chitim, when it comes to pishton, zora tulasa in the kiton. That same year, if you want to fill up, you'll need to put not 1 roiva, 3 roivas, and therefore only 3 revoim of pishton will be enough seed that will invalidate the chitim that it fell into. And if it's less than that, it will still be okay, and you won't have to do not yamayit and not yavod because you don't have a problem of marasayin. Gavaldik, l'chaim. That was a beautiful Gemara, guys. A whole different sugya, God willing, in the next year.
So like